All right, hello, and welcome to Gaining Experience. My name's Corey, and this is the RPG. Give me 1 second. Sorry about that, guys. This is the RPG, the role playing guru, Howard. And this show, Gaining Experience, is kind of like a role playing game podcast where we talk about aspects of RPGs, everything from Dungeons and Dragons, the Star Wars one, 7C, Vampire the Masquerade, Warhammer, whatever tickles our fancy. And today, well, before we even get into the topic, I'd like to say feel free to give us a comment below. If you're watching this live, we'll talk to you live. And if you do this if you're watching this as a recorded show, you can always leave a comment and we'll try and get back to you on our next show. So please do that. If you want to support a show like this, it's really easy. I have written a role playing game adventure called The Sunken Fortress, and you can buy it at the link below. It helps out this channel, and it's really well written. I did a really great job. I hope you agree, and if not, write a nasty review and tell me what you didn't like. So Howard, what is the topic today?
Hey, I think we're going to talk about skills, and, like when to use them, when not to use them, that type of thing.
Yeah, that's a good topic. That's what we do, right? So before we get into our topic, we like to warm ourselves up, get the creative juices going with a game called I Did Not See That Coming, with my excellent graphic. This is one of the best graphics I've ever made. How this game works is one of us comes up with an RPG plot, a plot idea, and the other person puts a twist or a spin at the end that is hopefully really good, really interesting. So I'll go first. My RPG plot is Dungeons and Dragons. In Etten, well, before we even get into that, the party comes across a naked person, or maybe a group of naked people on the road. And they claim that an Etten stole all their clothing, threatened them with violence, and robbed them only of their clothes. It didn't want anything else. If you don't know, an Etten is a two-headed giant. What's the twist?
It sounds like the plot of Puss in Boots. All right, so the Ettins stole their clothes. Is that they're claiming? Geez. I'm trying to imagine this Ettin running around with all these tiny clothes and, like maybe on his fingers, making little finger puppets. Because what's he doing with them? Why? Why is he doing this? What? There is a sock. Okay, so the twist is that the Ettin works for them, and this is just a trap to lure adventurers to the Ettin, who will then squash them, and then they take their adventurer stuff.
All right. So give me a plot.
That to me feels like the most logical. It may not be. When it's logical, it may not be a good twist. I apologize.
I kind of liked your original idea of he was making puppets to put on like a giant puppet show.
Well, yeah, I don't think his reason for stealing it's much of a twist. He's just that he's stealing it.
Your son is doing wacky stuff behind you.
That's 8-year-old. That's what's gonna happen. All right. So my plot. Let's do something different. We always do fantasy. Let's do space. You're the crew of a ship, and that ship has been hired to go take a package or just across space. So what should be a simple, a trip, just like a carrier, except you pulled out of hyperspace or warp speed, whichever your space opera is using, early because
because the cargo are clones that have gotten out of their cell and have sabotaged their ship and are trying to take over the ship for themselves.
Nice. Clones of you and your crew?
Yeah, that's an excellent idea. That's the greatest theft of a ship of all.
That would be really cool. I kind of like this plan. All right, cool. Let's do that. All right, so moving on
to the main topic of the show, skills. So, we got a little checklist here. So, our first thing that we need to talk about is the basics. When do we do a skill check?
All right, so here's my take on skill checks. I'm more of a theater of the mind kind of dungeon master. I like to see things just flow. So for me, if it is not important, I will skip the skill check. If you have a thief who is picking a lock, but it is like because he found a diary and it's not in any way integral to the plot, I'm like, whatever, there's a lock in the diary. You can pick it. You're a skilled thief. Sooner or later, you're going to get it. So, all right, while you're doing that, I'll describe something else. I'm not going to require the skill check. But you do have to use them eventually. So obviously when it's integral to the plot, when it's something you're not sure if your player should be able to accomplish, those are the two main reasons to do it, in my opinion.
You see, I agree with you to a point, but there are certain skills that can build suspense by making them roll it over and over, like perception or investigation. It's like, or that insight is now what it's called in Dungeons and Dragons. I used to call it awareness, like understanding another person.
Yeah. All right.
And making those checks, even if they're superfluous, can build suspense or cause suspicion or make players act in a jumpy way that they wouldn't normally act in.
Well, that is integral to the plot then. So I would totally make those. I make my players make perception checks and insight checks all the time. I usually don't make them make insight checks. If I have characters lying to them or being suspicious and they don't call me on it and say, can I insight check that? I just roll with it and let them believe whatever crazy thing I just said because they didn't think of it. I think insight has to be on them to say, hey, I'm suspicious. I would like to try and read that person's mood. I don't want to tell them to do that because I feel like I'm giving something away. I don't want to say, hey, insight check, because that's like me going, hey, I'm lying.
There's something to be said about trying to get players, instead of like, you want to get them to role play as in play their character, not role play like roll dice. And a lot of people nowadays, every time they meet a new character, insight check. I want to know about this guy. Insight check. After everything he says, insight check.
If they don't know him, I quickly, I have a chart on the inside of my DM screen that it's right from the book. A 5 is like an easy roll, a 10's like a moderate, and 15's like difficult, I think is what it says. And I just add 5 immediately. If you don't know the person, it's 5 points harder on that chart to try and get a good read on them because you don't know what their mannerisms are like. They might just have a twitch. You don't know. So he keeps blinking. He's lying. No, he just blinks. He's got dust in his eye. You don't know the guy. There's no reason that you should automatically know anything. So if they want to be like that, it's fine. It's just going to be harder for them. They're going to keep getting the response of, yeah, he's hard to read. You don't really know him. When let's say roll a nat 20 and then add their insight and they're like, well, I got a 26. Oh, well then for some reason you just are like in tune with what this guy's thinking, which has happened in real life. You've met people and just immediately click with them and sort of get a good feel for them, or maybe you absolutely failed and just thought you did.
So we both watched a video this week from Taking 20. We're both not fans of this guy.
He's a nice guy, and I like his show. I don't know what it is. There's something about him I think reminds me of somebody else, and I'm like, when I see him. It has nothing to do with him. He seems perfectly nice.
But he had a show about he had his old live stream, his Discord chat or whatever, and a person brought up that we do charisma checks backwards in the fact that someone has to describe what they're doing for the check, then make the check, and based on that, you get a bonus or a subtraction. But if you're picking a lock, you just say, I picked the lock, you roll the die, and then describe what happens. And I disagree with that. You disagree with that it's backwards.
Yeah, the way he described it, and I'm not 100% sure because I didn't watch it today or anything, but the way he described it to my memory is like you said, you walk up. I think the example he used was a group of adventurers trying to say, "Hey, we're merchants going into the city," but they're like dressed in armor, carrying weapons, and they didn't have a cart full of merchandise. So but you walk up and you give the excuse, "Oh, we're just merchants. We're trying to get into the city to sell our wares," and then you make your persuasion check. I think that's the exact right order to do it because by describing it to me as the dungeon master, I can then say, well, he can clearly see that you don't match the description of what you just said, and he doesn't see any merchandise. So that's going to, like I said, that chart, I'm going to bump it up on there by 5 points or maybe even 10 points if what you're saying seems completely opposite of reality, and then let you make your persuasion check. So I think that's the exact right order. He compared it to like pushing a log in the road to stop an oncoming cart. You say you're going to do it, and then you describe pushing the log. I'm like, no, if you say, I say you're doing it backwards. Then if you tell me I'm going to grab a big heavy log that's definitely big enough to stop those wheels, you've told me the size of it, which gives me an idea of where on the chart moving this log should
Or
be.
I pull out my crowbar and use it as a lever to push the log in the way.
Yeah,
Like
right,
there's so
and I
many
can
things.
lower it.
There's so many things people do to describe what they do before a skill check. It just doesn't work with charisma. With investigation, everybody always asks, "How are you investigating?" No one says, people usually say, "Oh, I pick up the picture. What do I notice about it?" Make an investigation check. No one just walks into a room and just says, "I investigate." That's sloppy gaming. No one likes it.
Exactly. I think that his example of the correct direction was, in my opinion, backwards. You should describe exactly what you're doing, then we'll decide what the difficulty for the check is. Because without knowing the exacts, how can I decide if this is a hard or easy thing to do? Because the way he does it, it sounded like he describes after you've made the check a hard situation or an easy situation. Like if you are a puny guy and he's like, well, you tried to move a big log and you just couldn't. But if you're a puny guy, you wouldn't have started with that. You'd have said, I go get a whole bunch of them one at a time or two at a time, and I will build like a thing in the road. And you would know to do that. So you should describe first.
This moves into our next topic point real quick. Skill approaches. This is something I'm noticing more and more in games where you have a list of skills and they don't match up to your attribute. Like in Dungeons & Dragons, if you have perception, it's always wisdom. If you have athletics, it's always strength. That's just what it is. But in a lot of these games, I just picked up Legend of the Five Rings, and in it, the skills don't have attributes. You tell me what your approach is, how you are using the skill, what you're doing to make the skill work. Then, depending on your approach, we say what attribute is involved in it. Are you trying to persuade the person in a devious way? Then use your attribute that's more devious than it is charisma. Are you trying to do it in a more intimidating way? Maybe strength is the more appropriate attribute to use instead of charisma at that point when you are persuading.
If you smash the table, it's not a matter of am I convincingly smashing it? It's smashed.
So
I see what you're saying.
I really like these approaches, and it makes all checks backwards in the way that the guy from Taking 20 describes. Have you played any games that use approaches?
I believe Vampire did. Vampire the Masquerade / whatever the newer one's called. I believe that was you describe it, and they pair off your skill with your appropriate attribute.
Yep, I'm being signaled by my SO over here that 7C also does that. So
Well, anything L5R does is what 7C did first, because they're the same system.
John Wick created both of them. Yeah. I like the skill approach way. I think if you use skill approaches in Dungeons and Dragons, it's a good homebrew to use. Yeah, I'm totally on board with that. So if you don't know what skill approaches is because you're in a Dungeons and Dragons box, check it out and see if it's useful in your game.
You can do it in D&D if with your DM's permission, or if you are the DM, you can just allow it.
That's why I said it's a homebrew.
Especially charisma checks that are intimidation based, an unlikable person can still be a scary person.
Yep. So are all skills useful in a game? There's a lot of games out there that are like Champions or which is the hero system, or GURPS.
Big Eye, Small Mouth.
Big Eye, Small Mouth, yeah. Where you have a huge list of skills, but all of those skills are not created equal. They're not going to be useful in some games. I think...
Actually, in Big Eye, Small Mouth, on that topic, they did a really good job. The last time I played, I think, was 2nd edition. They did a really good job at parsing out which skills most apply to each genre and charging you way more for useful skills and way less for not useful skills. I mean, if you're in a fantasy genre and your concept is, I'm from the future and got sent back here, your computer programming fluff is just fluff. It's a super cheap skill because it'll never come up. But you can still have it. Whereas horseback riding and sword wielding are super expensive.
I thought that was... I remember... Yep. I remember that as well. I thought that was an excellent idea. But a lot of games don't have something like that. So I think if you're using a universal system, it's very, very important to tell your players what skills are going to be important in the game. My game is going to be focused around this. So you should want to consider getting these skills over these skills. These skills might not be important.
I think that some dungeon masters or game masters would fear that because they don't want to feel pigeonholed into whatever they initially said their game would be. But I think the converse side of that, the opposite side, is to you're helping your players be prepared for what you want to run. So don't, if you decide mid-game or mid-campaign you want to change the direction, just be sure and find a way to help your players adjust so that they can keep playing and still have fun in your game.
So in the new L5R game, there are an entire section on making new skills for the game. You can just say, this skill is important to this game. And it says you have to tell these players at character creation, if you allow a skill in like this mid-game, it's unfair to everybody. Oh, look, a cat just went to the picture. You are just filled with family today, Howard.
I am that.
So... a 3rd edition Dungeons & Dragons had a really neat concept. It had taking 10 or taking 20. If you don't know what this is, basically a lot of skills allow you to basically do it over and over and over again. You just keep rolling until you make it. 5th edition doesn't allow this rule, but in 3rd edition, if a situation like that came up, the player could just take 20, which means they spent 5 minutes trying to figure it out, and eventually they get it.
Yeah, I think that's that got rid of my original thing that I said at the beginning of this video was if it's something that you could definitely do and it's not important, I would just let you do it.
Yeah.
In a game where take 10 or take 20 is allowed, I would say you can take a 10 if you want. And just let it kind of bypass, but you couldn't do it in combat, obviously, because I think both of those required extra time. How I do multiple rolls, like if you're like, hey, I'm picking this lock, and I have failed, well, I'm going to pick it again. I can keep trying, right? You can, but what I'll do is I will put a time on there. So for each failure, you have wasted maybe 2 minutes. And after a while, if it takes you an hour to pick a lock, things can happen. Guards are coming. People are walking around. Sooner or later, you're going to get busted. So
I like to do an added like, oh no to that. Whereas if you like for the lockpicking example, yes, but you run the you run the risk of jamming the lock or breaking a pick because you're getting more and more frustrated with the lock. So maybe now, like a 1 and a 2, if you roll that, something bad might happen. The next time it's a 1 through 4, something bad might happen.
You're a big fan of crit fails. I'm not.
We'll do a show on crits maybe one of these days, including crit fails. So that's how I like to do over and over. I guess that's about it for that topic, huh?
Unless you have some more.
I don't think so. I got combined skill tests is the last thing I think we need to touch on. And I think
when someone helps you?
I think
and D&D it's super simple with the help action.
Yeah, you just get advantage.
Yeah.
But I think all help actions are really, they're not that great. Like, they don't feel right to me. I've never seen a help action that feels great, because if I'm really competent and the other person's really competent, in Dungeons & Dragons, I get advantage. If I'm really competent and the other person's not competent, I still get advantage. Like, nothing, help doesn't take, I haven't seen very few games that take into account the person's skill level when doing a help action. And that's usually because I think it complicates the game needlessly, but it doesn't always feel right, especially when everybody wants to help. Like,
it certainly streamlines it, though. And I think the idea is the cinematic effect of you're picking the lock, and I'm going to help you. I don't know how to pick locks. You know, the Dungeon Master could easily just roll. You can't do the help action unless you have the ability to help. But if you can come up with some other way that you can help, be like, hey, you know what? It's dark in here. You are at disadvantage. I hold a torch up. That'll cancel out the disadvantage. That's the same as the help action at that point. Other things that you can do to help, if you can't actually pick a lock, I really can't think of any, except maybe provide cover or something like that if you're under fire.
So Tarek is in the room, and he wants more Sock Puppet, of course. He wants.
Well, okay, well, I'll say hi, Sock Puppet.
There you go, just for Tarek.
Hi, Tarek. Do you have any questions about skills, Tarek?
Yeah, you got a question about skills?
This is performance, by the way. Sock Puppet, Sock Puppetry.
So yeah, there are definitely ways that unskilled people can help. I just wish another thing, combined or helping in a skill roll. When one person says "I'll help," and that person gets a bonus, another person says "I'll help too," and when that doesn't confer added bonus, that other person gets upset. But if it does, then everybody wants to help at the same time, and it seems like 50 people are digging a 1-foot hole at the same time.
I like it that the only one person can give you the help action, or you can only take the advantage from one help action, because it stops this effect, which I've always been annoyed by as a dungeon master. All right, there's an ambush that you have set up, and you say, all right, who's in front? Roll a perception check. And everybody's like, oh, well, I'm looking too. Well, all right, if you have 5 people, which is your average party size, and all 5 of them get to roll, odds are super in their favor that one of them is going to get a ridiculously good roll and notice no matter how good your ambush is. But by saying, all right, who's in the front? All right, you are. Oh, I'm looking too. All right, you have the help advantage. So you have advantage.
I like it.
And when the other 3 people are like, I'm also looking, that's great. He already has the advantage, though. But it's good to know that everyone is looking. So when we get the results, I'll be like, you all notice, or something like that.
Okay, man.
So
I'm fine.
This brings up another thing that skill checks are like. Bugs me about skill checks. Rolling over and over the same thing. It feels like rolling to fail. Stealth is a great example of this. All right, you're going to stealth into the castle. Make your stealth roll. Okay, that just gets you over the wall. Now you need another stealth roll to enter through the window. Okay, now you're going through the hall. You need another stealth check. Like, you're at that point, you're just rolling to fail. Because you're going to fail eventually.
I see what you're saying. I kind of do stealth and have is I look at it as you have your stealth up, which I know that makes it sound like you've activated a power, but the way I do it is, all right, you've got your stealth up. You're being stealthy for this scene until something significant changes. Like I already know where my guards are, or whoever it is you're stealthing by. I know if they're going to see you or not based on your rolls and their passive perception. So you stealth and you're making your way through. I'm going to count that for getting over the wall and making it down the hall until something changes. If you sneak into a room, you see if there are people in there, and you're like, all right, well, now we want to sneak through the room, find places to hide so we can jump up and kill this guy. That's going to be a new stealth roll. If you want to just continue on, if you've already made your stealth roll, I probably won't make you need to re-roll it.
I just think it's important for game masters to know if you make people continue to make skill checks for something they already just done without a significant change, you're just punishing them. That's what it feels like to me.
I agree. Now I can see the converse of that, where you're like, okay, I have this huge thing planned, and you're worried that they're going to sneak past it. Well, you can either make your guys more aware, just put a dog in there. And when people get spotted by the dog, people always go, yeah, well, it makes sense. It's a dog. And you'd be surprised how often players will totally let that go. Oh, darn, they had a dog. I didn't even think of that.
So Tarek wants to ask us how we feel about the implementation of skills in RPG games, video games.
Yes.
For like Torment, Planescape. Huh?
Oh, because
Fallout.
He literally was just talking about in the Worgen starting area of World of Warcraft. There's a scene where you have to walk past guards with dogs, and despite the fact that you're invisible, the dogs keep spotting you.
I hate that. You have to like book it after someone sees it.
So
all right. So what's you talking about? Skill checks in like
in video games, like RPG video games, like how I like in like Fallout and Torment. If you're dumb, your dialogue choices change.
Yeah, or if you're not charismatic.
Yeah, exactly. And I always thought that was an interesting
I appreciated that. It also, I remember when you would pick a lock, the game itself had an internal die roller, and sometimes you would it'd say you failed, and sometimes the lock would open. And he would be like, got it, or whatever. Sorry for the cat. And so, child.
There's an action gamification of RPGs nowadays where it's more based on the player's skill, and like RPG buffs you get in the video game are just like extra damage or just extra stats for your extra hit points for yourself. You still have to like aim and hit. Mass Effect 3 definitely is like this, where it's more skill based.
I am not an amazing fighter, so I think that puts more on me than it would on the character of the amazing fighter that I'm playing. I mean, it's a video game. I'm not a bad video game player. I'll figure it out eventually. But I think like Skyrim and the original Elder Scrolls games, it was always you're just sitting there waving a sword. If the character's good with a sword, he'll hit a lot. If he's not good with a sword, he'll miss a lot. But either way, you're just sitting there waving a sword. And the graphic kind of looks just like that too.
But nowadays, like you have to really aim and figure out what you're going to do with, you got to aim that spell to hit. It's not just going to throw out there and roll a random D20 and see if it hits or not. You got to really be good with your Twitch controller skills. So I think we're done for today. We got to wrap this up. We're actually going to go a little bit over time, but we need to do
back of the book.
We need to do the back of the book, guys. We need to do it. It's super important. If you don't know what the back of the book is, it's a segment where we like to showcase something you may not know in video games. It may be fun, it may be stupid, it may be just something that I appreciate. And today, it's just something I appreciate.
And maybe in role-playing games. You said video games.
Oh, did I say video games? Dang it. I blame Tarek.
That's a good plan. I do too.
So in the original Monster Manual, there was a list of demons, and one of these demons was this guy right here, Jubilex.
I remember Jubilex.
He's one of my favorites, simply because I like saying his name, Jubilex. What he is a just he's a creature, a primordial creature made entirely of ooze and slime and just the grossest things. He's like apparently
So he's an 8-year-old.
yellow molds, green slimes, black puddings. They have a god, and it is Jubilex. By the way, he rose from going from first edition AD&D to second edition AD&D. He became a god. He rose from just a demon to godhood. Despite the fact he has no worshippers, because slimes can't worship people. That's weird.
I like the idea of Slime Church.
Slime, take me to Slurch. So I know him from Monster Mythology, a great book from AD&D second edition, and that's his write-up right there from AD&D second edition. He's been in a bunch of adventures. Let me look them up right now. In first edition, he was in the Manual of the Plains. He was in Castle Greyhawk. Plain Chaos. He was in the Temple of Elemental Evil. So he's been a couple. He's been in the Demonomicon. So a bunch of things he's been in. If you don't know him, look him up, and you'll be tickled. I hope. So that's it. That is Gaining Experience. Thank you, Howard, for joining me for another amazing episode. Like I said, if you're watching this as a recorded thing, put a comment below with your skill questions. We'll get to it next episode. And join us for next episode next Wednesday at 6 p.m. Pacific. Oh, and hey, there's no level cap on life. So remember, never stop gaining experience. I'll see you later, Howard.